A little pup ran crying to the Lycan King, saying they hurt my mom, and he made them pay. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Ethan Blackwood, the Lycan King, sat on his throne, the weight of his royal responsibility pressing down on his broad shoulders. His kingdom stretched far and wide, a land ruled by strength, power, and loyalty, where the law of the Lycan was absolute. Ethan was no ordinary king. He was a fierce warrior, a protector of his people, and a leader who never hesitated to strike when justice called. But today, something different had happened. A cry echoed through the grand halls of the palace. It was the sound of desperation, the kind of scream that shook the soul. Ethan's eyes narrowed as he stood, his powerful frame cutting through the shadows. The cry was coming from the castle gates. As he approached, his sharp senses picked up a scent, a familiar one, but tinged with fear. And then he saw it. A small figure, trembling and out of breath, limping towards him. It was a pup, barely older than a child, but something about its eyes told Ethan this pup was not like others. This one had experienced pain far beyond its years. The pup's fur was a mix of silver and gray, and as it stumbled closer, Ethan could see the tears in its eyes. The little creature collapsed at his feet, looking up at him with eyes full of anguish. "They hurt my mom." The pup's voice trembled. Ethan's heart tightened. It wasn't the first time someone had come to him seeking justice, but something about this plea was different. The pup, though small and fragile, had the bravery to seek him out. The Lycan King knelt down, lifting the pup in his arms. His mind raced as he processed the words. A mother had been harmed, and this pup was left to fend for itself. Ethan's voice was calm, but there was a dangerous edge to it. "Who did this to your mother?" The pup's tiny form shuddered as it spoke the names of those responsible. Alpha Jareth and his pack, a rogue group who had broken the sacred laws of the Lycan and brought harm to an innocent. Ethan stood up, cradling the pup in his arms. His expression hardened. "Stay here. I'll make them pay." Ethan Blackwood strode through the palace corridors, the weight of his decisions pressing on him. His powerful legs moved with purpose, each step echoing like a drumbeat through the vast stone halls. He held the trembling pup close, his eyes narrowing with determination. There was no time to waste. The pup's tiny voice still rang in his ears. "They hurt my mom." The anger that had been building in him now burned like fire. But he kept his emotions in check. A king had to remain composed, even in the face of injustice. As he reached the grand doors that led outside, he handed the pup to one of his trusted warriors. "Take care of him," Ethan said, his voice steady. "Keep him safe." The warrior nodded, but Ethan could see the concern in his eyes. He didn't need to say more. The warrior had seen the kind of wrath Ethan could unleash when his people were harmed. Ethan made his way toward the stables, where his massive black steed awaited him. The stallion pawed at the ground, sensing his rider's tension. Without a word, Ethan mounted the horse and galloped out of the gates, the wind whipping through his hair as he left the safety of his castle behind. His mind was focused, each muscle in his body primed for the task ahead. The names the pup had whispered burned in his thoughts. Alpha Jareth and his rogue pack. They had broken the sacred laws of the Lycan, and now they would pay. The journey was long, but Ethan's resolve did not waver. The sun began to set as he rode through the dense forest, the shadows growing longer as the darkness of night approached. He had been here before, in this very forest, fighting battles for his people, but this time felt different. This time, it was personal. As the forest opened up to a clearing, Ethan saw them. The rogue pack, a group of disorganized Lycans that had long since turned away from the law of the Lycan, were gathered around a fire. They were laughing, talking, unaware of the storm that was about to descend upon them. Ethan's grip tightened on the reins of his steed as he dismounted, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that this encounter would change everything. He had tried to stay above the petty squabbles of rogue packs, but this was no longer just about law and order. This was about the safety of those he loved, and no one would harm his people and get away with it. With a swift motion, Ethan pulled his sword from its sheath, the blade gleaming under the fading light. He advanced toward the pack, his presence commanding. The rogue Lycans looked up, their laughter fading as they saw the towering figure of the Lycan King approaching. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, Alpha Jareth stepped forward, a smirk on his face. Well, if it isn't the great Ethan Blackwood, Jareth taunted. What brings the mighty king to our humble camp? Ethan's eyes locked onto Jareth's, his voice low but filled with a cold fury. You've broken the laws of our people. You harmed the innocent. And for that, you will pay. Jareth's smile faltered for a brief moment before he regained his composure. You think you can just waltz in here and threaten us? Jareth sneered. You've come a long way, but you're alone. Ethan's eyes narrowed. I'm never alone. With that, he signaled to his warriors, who emerged from the shadows, surrounding the rogue pack. The time for talk was over. Ethan stepped forward, ready to do whatever it took to protect those who were under his care. Ethan stood tall, his eyes locked on Alpha Jareth, the leader of the rogue pack. The air around them was thick with tension, the forest eerily silent as the rogue Lycans began to realize that their reckoning had arrived. The campfire flickered, casting long shadows over the gathering. But the warmth of the flames was no match for the cold fury emanating from the Lycan King. Alpha Jareth stepped back, his smirk now replaced with a hint of unease. You may have brought your warriors, Blackwood, but we are not afraid of you. Ethan's gaze didn't waver. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of a king. You should be. Without another word, Ethan signaled for his warriors to advance. They moved like shadows, fluid and silent, surrounding the rogue pack with precision. Ethan's focus was entirely on Jareth. There would be no second chances. Jareth hesitated, his eyes flickering between Ethan and the warriors who now encircled them. For a moment, it seemed as though the rogue Alpha might attempt to flee, but his pride wouldn't allow it. You think you can control us? You think you can make us bow to your so-called laws? Jareth spat, his voice dripping with venom. Ethan's expression remained unchanged. Your actions have consequences, Jareth. The law is clear. You harm the innocent, you harm us all. The rogue Alpha took a step forward, his posture defiant. But there was fear hidden beneath his bravado. He knew the reputation of Ethan Blackwood, the Lycan King. No one had ever defied him and lived to tell the tale. What will you do, Ethan? Kill us all, Jareth challenged, his voice filled with both defiance and fear. Ethan's voice was low, but each word was a promise. I will make you pay for what you did to that pup's mother. The rogue Lycans around them shuffled uncomfortably, sensing that the moment of reckoning was at hand. But Ethan wasn't just here to punish Jareth. He was here to restore the balance that had been disrupted by the rogue pack's lawlessness. The fight was not just for justice. It was for the future of the Lycan people. Ethan raised his hand, and at his command, the warriors moved into position. This ends tonight, he said, his voice steady. The tension in the air was almost tangible, as if the entire forest held its breath, waiting for what would come next. Jareth looked around at his pack, realizing that the battle they were about to face was not one they could win. But even in the face of certain defeat, his pride refused to let him back down. We will not bow, he snarled, his eyes burning with defiance. Ethan didn't respond to Jareth's words. Instead, he stepped forward, his presence overwhelming. With each step, the rogue pack seemed to shrink back, their confidence slipping away like sand through their fingers. They had once been a force to be reckoned with, but now, standing before the Lycan King, they were nothing. Ethan reached the center of the clearing, his warriors flanking him. His eyes were cold, and his voice carried the weight of the law as he spoke again. This is your last chance, Jareth. Leave this place, and I will let you walk away. Jareth's lips curled into a snarl, but his defiance faltered. He could see that there was no escaping the consequences of his actions. You are too late, Jareth hissed, but it was clear that even he knew the fight was lost before it had even begun. Ethan's eyes never left Jareth's, his determination unwavering. Then it's over. With that, Ethan signaled once more, and his warriors closed in. The rogue pack was no match for the might of the Lycan King's forces. Jareth's pride had led them to this moment, and now, there was nothing left but the inevitable outcome of their defiance. Ethan stood motionless as the rogue pack, now fully surrounded, began to lose their earlier confidence. Their smirks and defiant postures melted away under the weight of his unwavering gaze. It was clear to everyone watching, there was no escape. Alpha Jareth's shoulders sagged slightly, and for the first time, a hint of fear flashed in his eyes. The Lycan King's reputation preceded him, and even the most defiant knew when it was time to submit. Ethan's warriors, standing in a tight formation around the clearing, were as calm as their leader. They waited for his signal. Jareth's voice broke the heavy silence. "You don't have to do this," he said, his tone now less certain, almost pleading. "We were only trying to survive." Ethan's cold eyes locked onto the rogue Alpha. He had heard this excuse before from countless rogue packs, but it never justified breaking the sacred laws of their kind. "You break the law, and you harm the innocent," Ethan replied, his voice steady but filled with undeniable authority. "There is no forgiveness for that." Jareth looked around at his pack, his gaze flickering nervously from one warrior to another. Some of them, clearly out of their depth, were already starting to retreat, but Jareth's pride still held him in place. "We were hungry, Ethan. You think we haven't been driven to this? The law doesn't feed us." His words dripped with frustration, but they fell on deaf ears. Ethan had made his decision long ago. The safety of his people and the future of his kingdom came before any plea. "The law protects us all, Jareth. Without it, we are nothing." Jareth's face twisted with anger, but there was no fight left in him. He had pushed his pack too far, and now they would pay the price. Ethan raised his hand, signaling to his warriors, who stepped forward with measured precision. There was no need for further words. The rogue pack had been given their chance. They had chosen their fate. The warriors closed in, ensuring that the rogues would have no room to escape. Ethan's heart remained steady, but his mind was already focused on the next steps, ensuring that the law would be upheld and that the innocent would be protected. As the warriors moved to restrain the rogue pack, Jareth's voice rang out one last time, a final attempt to salvage his dignity. "You think this is over? You think we'll let you rule forever?" But Ethan didn't flinch. He had heard such threats before. He had seen kingdoms rise and fall, but he remained unshaken, knowing that his rule was based on strength, justice, and a deep sense of responsibility to those he protected. Ethan's eyes met Jareth's one final time. "Your rebellion ends tonight." With that, he turned to lead his warriors back toward the kingdom. The rogue pack had been subdued, and order had been restored. Ethan knew that there would be challenges ahead, but for now, he could return to the one thing that mattered most, the safety of his people. The pup's cries still echoed in his mind, and he knew that their journey wasn't over. But for tonight, the balance had been restored, and Ethan Blackwood, the Lycan King, had once again proven that no one could break the laws of his kingdom without facing the consequences. Ethan Blackwood rode silently back to the palace, his thoughts consumed by the events of the night. The rogue pack was subdued, and their leader, Alpha Jareth, would face the consequences of his defiance. Yet, the weight of the encounter lingered in Ethan's mind. As much as he had delivered justice, the cost of the conflict remained. He had seen the fear in Jareth's eyes, the reluctant realization that his pack's reign was coming to an end. Ethan knew that the fight for peace in the Lycan world was ongoing, but tonight, it had been a step in the right direction. The moon hung high in the sky, its light casting a pale glow over the land as Ethan's steed carried him back toward the castle. He could see the silhouette of the palace in the distance, a symbol of strength and protection for those under his care. As they neared the gates, Ethan's mind turned back to the pup, Liam. The young wolf had come to him in desperation, seeking protection for his mother. Ethan had not failed him, but he knew the road ahead for the boy would not be easy. The loss of a mother was a wound that would take time to heal. Ethan dismounted and walked towards the palace's inner courtyard. His warriors, having carried out their orders with precision, were now dispersing to their posts, their presence a silent assurance of the kingdom's safety. As Ethan entered the main hall, his gaze fell on the small figure standing by the doorway. Liam, his fur still damp from the journey, looked up at Ethan with wide eyes, waiting. The pup's posture was uncertain, yet hopeful. Ethan's heart softened at the sight of him. "Liam," he called gently. The pup's ears perked up at the sound of his name, and he hesitated before running to Ethan's side. Without a word, the young wolf pressed his small form against Ethan's leg, seeking comfort in the only protector he knew. Ethan knelt down, brushing a hand through the pup's fur. "You're safe now," Ethan said, his voice steady. "Your mother will be avenged, and no one will harm you again." Liam looked up at him with tear-filled eyes. The pain was still raw, but there was a spark of relief in his gaze. "Thank you," Liam whispered. Ethan smiled warmly, though it was tinged with sadness. "You have a long road ahead of you, little one," he said. "But you are not alone. I will help you through it." As Ethan lifted the pup into his arms, he could feel the weight of his promise settling on his shoulders. The Lycan King had delivered justice tonight, but the true test would come in the days ahead. He would ensure that Liam grew strong, that he would never again have to face the world alone. As Ethan walked through the palace halls, the sound of the pup's soft breathing was the only noise that filled the silence. The burden of leadership was heavy, but in this moment, with the boy in his arms, Ethan knew that it was all worth it. There was peace in the kingdom for now, but the work was far from over. With every challenge they overcame, Ethan knew that his duty to protect those he cared for would never end. Ethan stood in the quiet of the palace courtyard, the cool night air brushing against his face. In his arms, Liam was still, his small body curled up against Ethan's chest, comforted by the security he now felt. The events of the past few days had unfolded quickly, but they had left their mark on the young pup. Ethan had promised to protect him, to ensure that no harm would come to him or anyone else under his care. But as the Lycan King, Ethan knew that promises were easy to make, but harder to keep. The world outside was full of dangers, and the peace that he had fought for was always fragile. He had learned this lesson the hard way, time and again. He looked down at Liam, whose eyes were now closed in exhaustion, the pup finally allowing himself to rest. Ethan's gaze softened. Despite the fierce exterior he had built over the years, there was a deep well of compassion inside him. It was the reason he fought so hard to maintain order and protect those who couldn't protect themselves. As he walked through the grand halls, the soft footsteps of his boots echoed in the silence. His warriors were still stationed outside, ensuring that the rogue pack posed no further threat. The palace, though large and imposing, felt strangely empty to him in these quiet moments. He knew that he had done what was necessary, but there was always something more to be done. The Lycan world was complex, full of shifting alliances and ever-present danger. Ethan knew that his responsibility was not just to enforce the law, but to lead, to guide his people through the challenges they would face. He reached his chambers and gently placed Liam on a large cushioned bed, tucking the pup in carefully. Liam's soft breathing filled the room, and Ethan stood for a moment, watching him. He was just a child, yet he had already experienced so much pain. It was a painful reminder of the harshness of the world they lived in. But Ethan would make sure that Liam, and others like him, would grow up knowing protection and peace, even if it was only for a fleeting moment in time. The Lycan King walked to the window, his eyes scanning the night sky. The stars were dimly visible through the thick forest canopy, a vast expanse of darkness stretching out before him. His kingdom, his responsibility, was immense, and with each passing day, the weight of it all seemed to grow heavier. But for now, there was a brief calm. The rogue pack had been dealt with, and for the first time in a long while, Ethan allowed himself a moment to breathe. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. He turned, his gaze sharp, but when the door creaked open, it was one of his trusted lieutenants, a seasoned warrior named Victor. "My king, the council has requested your presence," Victor said, his tone respectful but urgent. Ethan nodded, his jaw tightening. There was always something else to attend to. He gave one last look at Liam, who was still peacefully asleep. "I'll be there shortly," Ethan replied, his voice low and controlled. As Victor left, Ethan took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. The kingdom was never truly at rest, and neither was he. With one last glance at the pup, Ethan knew that he would always be ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The safety of his people, his kingdom, and those like Liam depended on it. And as long as he was Lycan King, Ethan Blackwood would never stop fighting for their protection. Ethan walked into the council chamber, his mind still partially on the quiet moment he had just shared with Liam. The weight of his responsibilities always seemed to follow him, but tonight, something felt different. It wasn't just the challenge of dealing with the rogue pack. It was something deeper, something that gnawed at the edges of his thoughts. The council was already assembled, their faces a mix of seriousness and expectation. The long table at the center of the room was lit by the soft glow of candlelight, the flickering flames casting shadows on the stone walls. Ethan took his seat at the head of the table, his presence commanding attention. His warriors, the ones who had helped secure the kingdom and uphold the law, stood at the edges of the room, ever watchful, ready to act if necessary. My king, we are gathered to discuss the growing unrest in the Eastern Territories. The eldest counselor, Gareth, spoke first. His voice was gravelly, but it carried a weight that only years of experience could provide. Ethan nodded, his expression remaining calm, though his mind was already shifting to the matter at hand. The Eastern Territories had been a source of tension for months, and the reports from his scouts had been troubling. What is the current situation? Ethan asked, his voice steady but firm. Gareth looked to another counselor, a younger man named Darian, who immediately began speaking. The eastern border has seen increased activity from rogue packs and bandits, Darian reported. There are rumors of a growing alliance among these groups, and they seem to be getting bolder with their attacks. We believe they are preparing for something larger, perhaps an attempt to challenge your rule. Ethan's jaw tightened at the mention of a challenge to his authority. He had fought too long and too hard to allow his kingdom to be threatened by those who refused to live by the law. But he knew better than to act on anger alone. What are we doing to secure the border? Ethan asked. Darian hesitated before answering. We've sent patrols, but the terrain is difficult, and the rogue packs are becoming more coordinated. They are difficult to track, and they know the land better than our soldiers. Ethan leaned forward, his mind already working through the details. The rogue packs were becoming more dangerous, and if they were indeed uniting, it could mean trouble for the entire kingdom. The last thing he needed was a large-scale uprising. We need to send more forces, Ethan said, his voice calm but authoritative. Increase the patrols along the border and make sure we have eyes on the ground at all times. We can't afford to let them grow bolder. The council murmured in agreement, but Ethan could see the concern in their eyes. This wasn't a simple matter. If the rogue packs were uniting, it could be the beginning of something much larger than they anticipated. What about the allies we have in the south? Gareth asked. Ethan shook his head. They are stretched thin already, dealing with their own problems. We must rely on our own strength for now. A heavy silence fell over the room. The threat in the east was real, and everyone in the room knew it. Ethan had built his kingdom on the principles of strength and law, but even the most well-established kingdoms could crumble if they faced a unified enemy. He could feel the weight of his responsibilities pressing down on him even more now. Prepare for the worst, Ethan finally said. Send a message to the Eastern Territories. I'll be leading the first wave of troops myself. His voice was steady, but there was an intensity behind it that no one in the room could ignore. We will not allow this kingdom to fall. Not while I still breathe. The council nodded, a mixture of respect and wariness in their expressions. Ethan knew that this was just the beginning. The threat was real, and the road ahead would be difficult. But as long as he was Lycan King, he would ensure the safety of his people. There would be no surrender, no compromise. Not now, not ever. Ethan's decision to lead the first wave of troops to the Eastern Territories was not one he made lightly. As the night passed and dawn broke over the kingdom, he prepared himself mentally for the journey ahead. He had spent countless years establishing his rule, ensuring the safety of his people, but now, for the first time in a long while, he felt the weight of his choices bearing down on him in a way that was different. There was a quiet tension in the air as the soldiers prepared their gear, the sounds of armor clanking and weapons being sharpened filling the courtyard. Ethan stood at the edge of the palace grounds, watching as his warriors readied themselves for the march. His mind was clear, but there was a gnawing uncertainty that he couldn't shake. If the rogue packs were truly uniting, this could be the beginning of something much bigger than they had prepared for. But Ethan wasn't one to back down from a challenge. His duty was to protect, and he would not fail those who had placed their trust in him. As he turned to board his horse, he felt the presence of his closest lieutenant, Victor, standing beside him. "Are you ready, my king?" Victor asked, his voice steady but tinged with the same concern that Ethan felt. Ethan nodded. "We do what we must." The two exchanged a brief but meaningful look, one that conveyed a shared understanding of the dangers they were about to face. There was no room for doubt. Ethan mounted his steed, his warrior's gaze scanning the horizon. The journey ahead would take them deep into the heart of enemy territory, a place where danger lurked at every turn. But Ethan wasn't concerned about the physical challenges. He knew his warriors were capable, and he trusted them with his life. What worried him more was the larger threat that loomed over them, the growing power of the rogue packs and their desire to overthrow the established order. As the column of soldiers began their march, Ethan couldn't help but think of Liam, the young pup he had promised to protect. Ethan had seen the boy's pain, the loss of his mother, and he knew that the journey ahead would be just as difficult for him. The road to safety would not be easy, but Ethan would do everything in his power to ensure that the future would be different for Liam, for the young wolf, and for every innocent soul in his kingdom. The first few days of travel were uneventful, the quiet broken only by the occasional call of a bird or the rustle of leaves in the wind. The soldiers kept their focus, the tension in the air palpable as they neared the eastern border. Ethan's mind was sharp, constantly analyzing their surroundings. The eastern territories were far from the heart of his kingdom, a remote and wild land filled with dense forests and rugged terrain. It was the perfect place for rogue packs to hide, and it was also where Ethan's strength would be tested the most. As they approached the border, the signs of trouble became more apparent. Ethan could see the charred remains of villages, the remnants of attacks from rogue packs looking to establish dominance. His heart tightened as they moved closer, the familiar feeling of danger creeping up his spine. There was no turning back now. The time for hesitation was long gone. The first wave would push forward, but Ethan knew that it would be only the beginning of a much larger conflict. As they crossed into enemy territory, Ethan glanced over his shoulder, his eyes meeting Victor's. The look was all that needed to be said. This would not be an easy battle, but they had come too far to fail now. With each step they took into the eastern lands, Ethan's resolve grew stronger. There was no going back, only forward, and he would lead his people through whatever lay ahead. Ethan's heart pounded as they finally crossed into the heart of the eastern territories. The air felt different here, thick with the scent of smoke and the remnants of past destruction. The land was scarred from years of conflict, the once vibrant forests now mere shadows of their former selves. As the soldiers pressed forward, the sense of danger grew stronger. Ethan could feel it in his bones, the kind of threat that could change everything. His eyes scanned the horizon, alert for any signs of movement. He had been prepared for trouble, but the emptiness of the land unsettled him. No birds called from the trees, no animals moved in the underbrush. It was as if life itself had retreated from this place. The soldiers kept their formation tight, each warrior alert and ready. Ethan had learned long ago to trust his instincts, and right now, his instincts were telling him that something was off. The stillness was unnatural. "Stay sharp," Ethan instructed, his voice low but filled with authority. Victor nodded, his expression hardening as he scanned the surroundings. They continued moving deeper into the heart of enemy territory, knowing that every step brought them closer to the rogue packs. The days were growing longer, and the terrain more treacherous. Ethan kept his focus, his mind racing with strategies. He knew that this would not be a simple skirmish. This was shaping up to be a battle that would determine the future of his kingdom. After several more hours of travel, they reached the ruins of what had once been a thriving village. The buildings were half destroyed, smoldering remnants of past attacks. Ethan's eyes darkened as he took in the scene. It was a reminder of why they were here. The rogue packs had left nothing but devastation in their wake, and now it was time for Ethan to make them pay for what they had done. He signaled for his soldiers to halt. They were close now. Too close. "Spread out, gather intelligence," Ethan commanded. "We need to know where the rogue packs are hiding and how many of them there are. We move at night." As the warriors spread out to scout, Ethan found a moment of quiet to himself. He walked through the village, his boots crunching on the charred earth beneath him. The smell of burning wood still lingered in the air, a constant reminder of the destruction that had been wrought here. It was difficult to reconcile this image with the peaceful kingdom he had worked so hard to protect. But he had no choice. The rogues would be dealt with, no matter the cost. As he walked, Ethan's thoughts turned to Liam. The young pup was still back at the palace, safe for now, but Ethan couldn't shake the image of the boy's tear-streaked face from his mind. He had promised Liam that no harm would come to him, and the weight of that promise pressed heavily on his shoulders. He knew that this journey was about more than just protecting his kingdom. It was about safeguarding the future, ensuring that young wolves like Liam would never have to face this kind of hardship again. The scouts returned as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the desolate village. "We found their hideout," one of the scouts reported, his voice tense. "It's deep in the forest, heavily guarded. We can strike tonight." Ethan's gaze hardened. The time for waiting was over. "Prepare for battle," he ordered. "We move out at dusk." As the warriors readied themselves, Ethan stood tall, his eyes fixed on the darkening sky. The battle ahead would not be easy, but he was ready. He had no intention of letting these rogue packs destroy any more lives. The night would belong to the Lycan King, and he would ensure that the law would be upheld, no matter the cost. The darkness of the forest would soon be his battleground, and Ethan Blackwood would stop at nothing to secure the future of his people.